All right. Okay. This is, I don't know, Story of a Girl. No, this is the fifth time I'm recording this or something because I like iterating, which I think is prescient for the discussion we're going to be having today, which I'm sure will enrage a deep number of people on the internet because nothing upsets people more than talking about D&D and over-preparing. No, I'm sure there's things that bring more rage, but here we are, probably going to upset some people anyways, because I've consumed copious amounts of content, probably very gifable what I just did, across the internet in terms of over-preparing for Dungeons & Dragons as a DM and what that means, and it's interesting that I agree with some of what I've seen and disagree quite adamantly with other parts. I'm not going to go into that. I don't want to do a meta-analysis. We're not here for that black hole of YouTube. But what I do want to talk about is sort of the things that I think are kind of being missed. The forest being missed for the trees, if you will, in terms of over prep. Okay, so right off the bat, what the hell are we talking about? What is over prepping in the context of Dungeons & Dragons? And well, that's part of the problem, is that I feel like most people, when they say over prep, they're talking about the prescriptive advice, which is, as a DM, do not spend time on things pre-session or pre-campaign that will not bring value to the session or campaign. I fully agree that is the ideal scenario. Do not spend time on making content, let's just call it content, for your players that your players will never use. Awesome. I super agree that that's a good thing. I also think it's basically impossible. Okay, I think you can get better at it over time. You can know, as you DM, what brings value to the table. And as you DM more and more, you will understand more and more what does and does not bring value to the table. What are the things that when you spend time on them out of session and bring that to the session, your players are like, this is awesome! And the things that you spend time on that either make no difference or your players don't engage with at all. And that is very good. The problem with the advice, don't over prep, is that it's really DMs who have a bunch of experience looking back on their past selves at all of the knowledge they have attained about themselves as a DM, their style, the skill of DMing, and looking back at what they did and feel like it was wrong in the past, and they have all of this hindsight to say, I shouldn't have done X, Y, or Z, I shouldn't have prepped X, Y, or Z, because they know already, because they're kind of living the future self, their future life, what brings value to their tables. You as a new DM have no idea. And the best way to find out is to prepare a lot, which is the opposite of what those DMs are telling you. The more you prepare, in fact, the faster you will discover what brings value to your table. You'll feel this kind of pull towards using certain stuff when you're DMing. And the stuff that you feel that pull towards, I can't just give you a list because it will be different for you. It'll be different for it can be different between DMs, it can be different between campaigns, it can be different between sessions, right? I can prep an hour a week for a 4-hour session, and that's enough for an entire campaign, and then I get a new group of players in a new setting, and suddenly I'm like, I don't know enough about this setting, I gotta prep more. These players have different expectations of the DM. They kind of want deeper narrative tie-ins. I gotta prep more. Because that's what's gonna bring value, is those things. But how do I know that those things will bring value? And the answer is, well, because I've DM'd, and I know that if I spend time on those things, they will bring value. Well, Dustin, can't you just give me a list of all the things that you have experienced? Yes, I can, but the problem is that those things probably won't be super great as barometers for you personally. So I think a better alternative to this, when it comes to trying to navigate the idea of over-preparing or just preparing in general, is to give you some heuristics, some general rules of thumb that will hopefully help you invest your time, in particular, spend your time with prep in a way that feels good for you? Okay, well, the first thing, and I kind of just alluded to it, is time management. You can kind of frame how much time you want to spend prepping in two ways. There might be other ways, but these are the two ways I think about them. There's the way in which there's some amount of prep you as a DM feel like you have to do. Let's just call it like your own, like your preparedness level that you can't do less than. And if you do less than that, you don't really like running sessions with less than that prep done. I feel like this is kind of the less common anecdotally mindset, but it is a mindset that I've had. And the result of this is actually more to push when your sessions happen. You might actually be like, well, I need 4 hours of prep to run this campaign for each session, so we got to play every other week because I can't muster 4 hours a week with my current schedule. Maybe later we can go to every week if something in my schedule changes. Okay, cool. You framed prep time around how often the campaign happens. Maybe you're eager, which I think is a kind of a common, especially if once you get like the DM high, you're like eager to play every week maybe, or like maybe you play more often than that even. Okay, well now what you need to do is frame it the other way. I only have an hour to prep for the session. This is what I can get done. What are the things that bring the most value? And I'm going to leave everything off the table, right? And again, you're making the decision about what's bringing value to the table in like real time almost. You're going to the session, you have prep, you're kind of looking retroactively the next week when you go to prep again, you're like, okay, you're looking at your past week's prep, you know, moving, like kind of turning things forward on the things that are getting pulled forward. And then you look at the stuff that's being left behind. And you're like, okay, well, that stuff didn't get used. Maybe some of the stuff that didn't get used was totally circumstantial, as in like it could have easily been used, but it just wasn't. Great. Pull that shit forward. Now that's less that prep I have to do later. Or there's some things that were like, this didn't come up and I couldn't envision a way that it did come up. Never do that stuff again. It's not going to bring value to this table. Cool, right? We learned something about what brings value, and we're making decisions about how to prep based on time, how much time I want to spend. Cool. Well, that's all right. So how do I maximize that time? How do I like spend that time focused as intentionally and thoughtfully as I can? And okay, so again, I don't want to prescribe broad methods of like lists of things to avoid, right? Like I'm not going to be like, no, don't come up with NPC names. I don't know. Maybe that's your favorite thing in the world, which means that's the thing you should. And if you feel it brings value, do it. Do it. Balance the things that you think are fun with the things that you think are valuable that maybe aren't as fun. And we'll come to that a bit later, and just follow that all the way to its natural conclusion, right? But here are some heuristics that hopefully will help you. They've helped me spend the time that I do have to prep to get the most out of it. And I think the biggest thing you can do, especially if you're coming to or you're writing or running a campaign that you either wrote the world of or are just running from a setting book, like you don't have an actual narrative, you wrote the whole narrative yourself, or you're writing the whole narrative yourself as you go. I highly recommend you just modularize the ever-living hell out of all of your content. What do I mean by that? Okay, so D&D actually structures their adventures in what they call a module, and their modules essentially contain everything you need to run it. But you can think of modularization kind of a layer down, where you could be like, well, what I could do is have a bunch of encounters that are like really generic. A wizard tower that just has a wizard, and there's some soldiers, and you don't really know who the wizard is, but you know they have soldiers, and you know roughly the not the outline, the layout of the tower, and there's X, Y, and Z magic item in there because they're cool and I like them and I want the party to have them at some point. Awesome. Now you have this like idea, all right, and it's super generic, but like I could go on D&D Beyond and look for, like I could look for sorcerer or wizard or arch wizard or whatever and find an NPC, like a stat block that will work, and I can definitely find one for soldier, right? So I'm not worried about if they have to fight that thing. I got it all set up, right? And at some moment then your party stumbles on a magic item that's like above their ability to identify. It's either wrapped in some enchanting shroud that prevents its identification with a spell that's any weaker than something like a legend lore. So they're forced to go see or find someone, or I shouldn't say forced, they feel compelled to go find someone who might be able to identify this item for them because they're weary of curses. Awesome. Here's a tower that has a wizard in it, and he's of great standing. He's a lordly wizard in the town you're in. He's almost like the mayor figure, so he has a small mercenary set of soldiers that just constantly follow and guard him from possible threats. The only reason you were able to do that is because you came up with this idea of a wizard tower that was cool without actually ascribing any use of it. You just come up with generic... you can think of them as encounters. That's like one way to think. You're modularizing the encounter. You can think of it as actually based around an NPC, right? So maybe you just like have blacksmith, and like here's a bunch of stuff about this blacksmith that's really interesting. Who knows where they'll encounter that blacksmith in the world? It doesn't matter. At some point they're going to need a blacksmith, and I'm going to put this blacksmith in front of them, right? That's the idea of modularity. Don't strap your content on to the very moment your players are in. Write it to just suit whatever need may fit where you feel like the generic flow and theme of this campaign is going, and you will broadly find that you're able to get a lot of value out of your prep. You'll end up with a lot of content that you're not expecting to use week over week, but you can just kind of write things when inspiration hits you, and then you have this like the ability to recall and be like, oh, I know I have X in my back pocket. I don't know exactly what I want the party to do right now, but this would be interesting. Put it in front of them, and you'll be amazed how your party will write the story, the narrative for you in that moment. They'll have these expectations around why this thing is here and what it might be for, and you can literally pull in real time and be like, yes, I like that. Let's just go with that. That is why this tower is here, etc. Okay. The other thing you can do, and this is the most prescriptive thing I'm going to mention in this video, is decoupling encounters from assets. And when I say assets, I mean literally like minis. You will find that in D&D, it is very easy to get attached to things you create or spend a lot of time in as a DM, do a lot of prep on, and then you'll want to make your players do them. So my advice around a heuristic for that is to just don't do that. And one of the easier ways to avoid that scenario is to just not get attached, not spend a lot of money, not spend a lot of time on making minis, boards, like literal machinations of what the encounter's topography is going to look like. Instead, use theater of the mind a lot for encounters where things are going to happen very off the cuff. Don't be afraid of that, or be okay with using generic placeholder tokens. Like I used to use poker chips with numbers on them, for example, and sometimes I still do. And then just like I use wooden blocks to just kind of like make random terrain just on the spot, right? And this is both very, it's doesn't constrain you, and it frees you from the problem of I spent all this time on this thing and the party's never going to get there, and you feel the need to pull them there because you want them to see the cool thing. You know they'll like the cool thing, but now you're driving the narrative because of your attachment to physical things in the real world, and not ideal. I'm not saying that's like bad. At the end of the day, you're going to have some scenarios. Like sometimes I want to like, really wow the players, and like the big bad is going to be in this specific place that I want them to fight them. Cool. I will kind of constrain the narrative a little bit to get them to that one big, really cool thing where I spent an enormous amount of time around constructing both physically and mentally some encounter. But those are rare, and the party sort of has an intuition about them, right? You come to this massive mystical steampunk laboratory. There's lightning shooting, linking between the towers, and there's mist and steam and fog billowing out of pipes, and a whistling, almost an eerie organ-like sound is coming from this building. And it's like, okay, well, of course, that's where we're going to fight the big bad. They'll have an intuition about that stuff, and then you don't have to work so hard. But like most of the time, it's like they're fighting thieves on the road. Who cares? Wooden blocks. Good to go. Okay. The last thing I want to talk about, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, is some prep is just shitty. Okay, some prep is just tedious and not fun. Okay, but there's like this idea as a DM that is unique to you, or unique to tabletop games to some degree, in that there's like this delayed gratification, and I think it just sort of comes with all of game design. There are parts of prep that each DM will not like, and they will be different between DMs and between campaigns, etc., etc. But you know they are worth doing from experience, because you know if you spend the time that it brings that little bit of value. So there's things that you can do and you can prep that are worth doing that are not fun. But the reason they're not fun, or they're still worth doing, even though they're not fun but still worth doing, comes through when you put them in front of your players and your players' reactions. So like I'll just kind of like use this, keep a through line here and use NPC examples. I'm not in love with naming NPCs. That's not my favorite activity to do, but I know when I do name them, I kind of do this mental legwork where I also kind of like come up with a general idea, concept, personality for who this character is that I don't do if I come up with them on the spot. So the players get way more value out of me doing it ahead of time, even though I'm not like super hot on doing it. It's not like my favorite thing to do, but I still enjoy doing it, not in the moment, but because I know when those NPCs hit the table, the value is brought there and the players enjoy it, and that brings me joy, and now we're all having fun playing D&D. Okay, so kind of let's just like recap. Hopefully no one is typing with angry fervor in the comment. I mean, if you are, please share your thoughts, or maybe you like really agree. But to recap, the idea of over preparation usually revolves around not bringing or spending time on things that don't bring value to the table. The problem as a DM, especially early on, what is valuable to bring to the table is a question only you can answer, and ultimately I can't give you a list of things because it's going to be different for every DM, and I would just be biasing you in a way that might not be fun for you, and then I pushed you away from D&D, and I don't want to do that. The solutions: try to be thoughtful with your time, either by constraining when sessions happen or by constraining how much you prep, and then deciding what's valuable week over week, changing, iterating, improving. Modularize your content as much as possible. Try to write stuff that doesn't matter when or where you use it. I didn't talk about this, but like you can even have the idea of scaling, right? Like, oh, it's a level blah wizard, and you just kind of maybe have like 3 general stat blocks on D&D Beyond, and you'll just use one of them based on when the party gets there or what feels right in the moment. Decoupling from assets. Don't get attached to physical things or even digital things on your digital D&D board. Be free to just using generic stuff in the moment and doing stuff off the cuff and theater of the mind, because it gives you more flexibility, and flexibility gives player agency, and player agency leads to fun. Most of the time, again, that's very prescriptive. That's the most prescriptive one I'm going to give you. And lastly, some things are tedious and you're just going to want to do them anyways because they bring value. But you know, the more you do them and the better you get at that stuff, the tedious stuff, the less time it ends up taking, and you kind of end up enjoying it in its own way anyways. There's like is it catharsis? Yeah, catharsis to the motion of doing those things. Anyways, if you found this insightful, useful, infuriating, aggravating, whatever emotion you are feeling right now, myself as a DM having you emote is the goal. Please share it down below, like, subscribe, dislike, whatever, however you want to engage, however you want to exercise your agency, please do it. And hopefully I'll see you again next time.